Joshua Buatsi has left Ben Shalom, boxer, and joined Queensberry, according to Uncrowned. This is via Yahoo Sports. So as you can see, the headline says, top light heavyweight Joshua Buatsi closing in on promotional deal with Frank Warren's Queensberry. So apparently not yet official, but it seems to be happening. It says here, light heavyweight contender Joshua Buatsi is Queensberry bound. Buatsi is expected to depart from Ben Shalom's boxer and finalize a promotional deal with Frank Warren's Queensberry Promotions this week. Sources close to the situation told Uncrowned. Now, obviously Buatsi split from Matchroom several years ago and joined Ben Shalom. And I was having a discussion about that situation with a member of my Element group earlier on today. And basically what happened was Buatsi was offered a title shot against Dimitri Bivol. Had he beaten Bivol, he would have been obviously tied into a rematch because he wasn't yet mandatory at that stage. If you're a mandatory, you get the option not to have a rematch. You know, you get an option to sign a contract where there's no rematch clause involved when you're mandatory. So he wasn't yet mandatory. He wouldn't have had that option to forego a rematch if somehow he'd beaten Dimitri Bivol. Also, Matchroom wanted options on him. They wanted to promote, you know, after the Dimitri Bivol fight, I think 1 or 2 more of his fights. So it basically would have been a 3-fight deal that Joshua Buatsi was signing for if he'd agreed to take that Bivol fight at that stage, okay? He was being offered somewhere in the region of £1 million or dollars to fight Bivol, and again, it was part of a 3-fight deal. Buatsi believed at the time that DAZN was not the platform to be on. He still believed in Sky and in their power and this, that, and the other. And so that was also part of his decision-making process to leave Matchroom and not fight Dimitri Bivol at that particular time. And the eventual court case between Matchroom and Ben Shalom revealed, as you can see on screen here, per court documents obtained by Uncrowned, Buatsi was offered an 18-month agreement with Boxer for a minimum of 4 bouts with a minimum total aggregate purse between £3.25 million and £3.75 million. Okay, now that's probably more than he would have got paid with Matchroom if you think about it, because this was pre-Saudi involvement, right? In terms of consistent involvement. He would have got the 1 million for Dimitri Bivol. Would he really have got 3 or 4 million for the other 2 fights combined? I doubt it. All right, so Buatsi thought that this was going to be more lucrative going with Boxer, and if he was due to fight Dan Aziz, if he could maneuver himself into a mandatory position, he was guaranteed that shot against Bivol anyway. So hindsight is always 20/20. There was somebody in my Element group arguing that in hindsight, it would have been better for Buatsi to stay with Matchroom. Possibly. But at the time, his reasoning was sound, I think, you know, or at least understandable. So he chose to go with Ben Shalom. But of course, it hasn't worked out for Ben Shalom on Sky. His Sky deal has come to an end. He perhaps didn't get Buatsi the opportunities that Buatsi would have hoped for or thought he was going to get with Ben Shalom. And I'm not sure how much of the money Joshua Buatsi was able to get out of his contract. Hopefully, there aren't any legal ramifications for him leaving this time like there were when he left Matchroom. Okay, and it says here, look, the London-based former WBO interim champion previously left Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing to sign with Boxer in 2023. The move was the subject of a £7.7 million high court battle after Matchroom alleged that Boxer and Sky Sports had persuaded Buatsi to unlawfully abandon his exclusive promotional contract with them. The lawsuit resulted in the respective parties reaching a settlement earlier this year. Now, I'm not sure if Buatsi was actually involved in this lawsuit, as in whether Matchroom was suing him or whether they were just suing Boxer and Sky Sports. I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that. All right. But this story about Buatsi leaving Ben Shalom and going to join Frank Warren is really part of the wider story about the fall of Ben Shalom, the apparent, at least for now, seeming fall of Ben Shalom. Because he does have a stable of fighters, Joshua Buatsi being one of them, Fraser Clark being another. Ben Whittaker perhaps being the most high profile, right? He's got a stable of fighters, and people are wondering where are his fighters going to go now? Are any of them going to stick around? Martin Bakoli's another one. I saw an interview with Billy Nelson earlier on today where he says he hasn't heard from boxer Ben Shalom for something like 10 weeks. That's crazy. Imagine you're signed to a promoter, you're contractually bound to them, and you haven't heard from them for 10 weeks. Even Chris Billum-Smith, he's still under contract with boxer Ben Shalom. He isn't in discussions with them. He's not sure what's going on right now. So there's a number of their fighters who are in limbo at the moment. I guess you could say similar to maybe PBC, but PBC I think are still doing shows every now and then. Boxer haven't yet secured a broadcast deal. There's been rumors that they're going to be signing with ITV, rumors they'll be signing with BBC, but these are just rumors at the moment. Nothing has come to fruition as of yet. So what do you guys think about this situation? Joshua Buatsi leaving Ben Shalom to join apparently Frank Warren. That, you would imagine, could lead to this fight which we've been waiting for so many years, at least British boxing fans, which is Anthony Yarde versus Joshua Buatsi. And in fact, I want to get something up here. I want to get the light heavyweight rankings up. I'll show you guys on screen. Let's just delete this. Get the light heavyweight rankings up. I'll come to your questions and comments in just a moment. Hold tight. Anybody in the chat? Just want to show you something interesting. So, this is the light heavyweight rankings of all the different sanctioning bodies. Obviously, Dimitri Bivol is unified IBF, WBA, and WBO champion. You got David Benavidez, the WBC champion. We all know that Anthony Yarde is fighting David Benavidez later on this year for that WBC light heavyweight belt. Joshua Buatsi isn't ranked after his loss to Callum Smith. He isn't ranked in the top 15 of any of the 4 major sanctioning bodies except for the WBC. And of course, Anthony Yarde, another Frank Warren fighter, is fighting David Benavidez for that belt. Joshua Buatsi is ranked 1 position below Anthony Yarde. Is that a coincidence? Well, I think most of us have been around in boxing long enough to realize that situations like this are rarely coincidences in boxing, and it's usually the result of some behind-the-scenes arrangement made between promoters and sanctioning bodies. Why is it only the WBC that still have Buatsi ranked relatively highly, right, in their ratings, and all the others don't have him ranked at all? Just a coincidence, I'm sure, that he's 1 position behind Anthony Yarde, and Yarde's about to fight for the WBC strap against David Benavidez. Now, to be fair, if Anthony Yarde were to beat David Benavidez, and I don't think he will, but if he were to beat him, he'd probably be tied into a rematch because it's a voluntary defense for David Benavidez, and in voluntary defenses, it's standard practice for the champion to have a rematch clause, a one-way rematch clause, right? If he loses, he gets to run it back with a guy who beat him. So, even if, as I say, Anthony Yarde were to beat Benavidez, he'd have to beat him again before we'd see a Yarde-Buatsi fight for a title, right? So perhaps it's more likely that we see Anthony Yarde versus Joshua Buatsi if Anthony Yarde loses to David Benavidez, as I expect him to. I'm not saying Anthony Yarde's got no chance. I think he's got some type of chance. But I do make David Benavidez a pretty firm favorite in that fight. But what say you? What do you guys think about this whole situation? Do you think this will bring us closer to the Anthony Yarde-Joshua Buatsi fight? And what circumstances do you think need to unfold before we see it? You know, the thing about Joshua Buatsi, Anthony Yarde is it's a domestic rivalry. It's a rivalry that people have wanted to see for a long time in the UK. Domestic rivalries are very lucrative. So for no other reason, you would imagine it would happen because of that. So, yeah, what do you guys think about this anyway? Throw it over to the chat. Shout out to Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says Bricktop should take his entire stable. He might still take Ben Shalom's entire stable. Cash says, is that an old picture? He's ranked number 7 on the WBO. No, I took the screenshot earlier on today. So the WBO. Oh, excuse me. He is there, the WBO. He is there. I totally missed it. There you go. But thank you for pointing it out. Yeah, no, he is there. Sorry, I didn't catch that. All right, he's number 6 with the WBC, but he is number 7 with the WBO. But I should also point out that the sanctioning body that Frank Warren has always been closest to, or at least since the inception of the company, has been the WBO. So that in itself isn't that surprising, right? Frank Warren's relationship with the WBC hasn't been as close, but again, since Anthony Yarde is fighting David Benavidez, Yarde has got a good ranking, and Joshua Buatsi's just below him. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out, though. Big up. Not always catching everything here. Coppen says Hatton versus Witter never happened. That's true. Oh, many rivalries that we all wanted didn't happen. But in most cases, rivalries do tend to happen eventually. If the money is there, you know, if there's enough public interest. Mr. Jack says, Ben Shalom said there was going to be an announcement weeks ago regarding next steps, but it's been silent. Indeed it has. Johnny Rico says, Frank Warren is the Terminator. Care to expand on that? I guess you mean to say he just keeps on going and going and going, right? The man never stops. He's indestructible like the Terminator. All right, somebody talking about Dr. Umar in there. Dr. Umar is just a comedian, bro. I don't even know whether Dr. Umar realizes he's a comedian or whether it's all just accidental and unintentional. I've got no idea. But it's just like, it's so cartoonish, the stuff that Dr. Umar says. You can't take man seriously at all. It's just, you know, I just watch his clips for pure comedy. Pure comedy. I saw a Dr. Umar clip the other day where he said that he had a dream and the ancestors told him that he was going to marry 2 queens. The ancestors have ordained it, you know. And he said one of them is going to be light-skinned, the other one's going to be dark-skinned, because he doesn't want to be known as a light-skinned supremacist or a dark-skinned supremacist. This is what he was saying. So his latest thing, what did he say there? Some girl gummy beared his Shango stick. Oh my God, that guy's something else, bro. He always repeats himself, yeah. Maybe he thinks it's some type of like, because he's a psychologist, so maybe he thinks he's learned applied psychology techniques where when you repeat something over and over again, it sticks in people's heads more. I heard that back in the days in school. Some teacher who I guess had some type of background in psychology said if you repeat things 3 times, it stinks in people's heads more. So maybe that's why he does it. It's like a lot of politicians, they do that. So Kitagata, is that how to pronounce your surname? Says as long as Yarde moves about a bit and stays off the ropes. I guess you're saying against David Benavidez. As long as he moves about a bit, stays off the ropes, he'll be okay? As in go the distance? Or do you mean actually win? Ali says, if it ain't nappy, I ain't happy. That's another one of Dr. Umar's sayings. It's just comedy, the whole Dr. Umar thing. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, let me not even go there for now. About Umar. So, yeah, I think that this is obviously the best move for Buatsi right now. He can't go back to Matchroom given the history between them. And I'm not sure Matchroom have got much for him, although they do have Dimitri Bivol, obviously. They probably wouldn't make it easy for Buatsi. I mean, he's going to have to get in a position anyway. He's coming off a loss. It's going to take a while for him to get into a position to be able to challenge for a light heavyweight title. And yeah, because of the history of Matchroom, they're not going to make it easy for him to get a shot against Bivol. So it's probably the best place for him to be with Frank Warren right now. And maybe because he's a lot closer to Matchroom than he used to be, Frank Warren, maybe it's perhaps more doable, you know? But yeah, for now, the Anthony Yarde fight would seem to be the direction that Joshua Buatsi would try and go in. Or David Benavidez after Anthony Yarde. Let's say Anthony Yarde gets beat by David Benavidez. Maybe if Joshua Buatsi can get another win in the meantime, he fights David Benavidez next. I mean, I certainly would like to see David Benavidez fight Dimitri Bivol. I think that's a real good fight. I don't think it's the one-sided boxing lesson that many other people do. I personally think David Benavidez gives Dimitri Bivol a lot of trouble. And it's something different than seeing Dimitri Bivol fight Artur Beterbiev again. We've seen it twice already. Both fights were close, but yeah, that's my take on that. We do have some more boxing news that we can get into if you guys aren't particularly interested in the fortunes or misfortunes of Ben Shalom right now. Daniel Rain says, Hatman, do you think Anthony Yarde can do it? I think he can, but I don't think he will. Yeah, I agree with Ocean Blue. He says, I'd rather see Bivol Benavidez than Beterbiev Bivol trilogy. 100%. Isaac says, I heard Benavidez drop Bivol in sparring. I heard the same. Mark Hatch says Yarde looked bad in his last fight. I think it was a mixed bag from Anthony Yarde in his last fight. His last fight was the trilogy match with Lyndon Arthur. And I thought through the first half, he was poor. But once Arthur started running out of gas, maybe partly because of the body shots from Anthony Yarde, Yarde was able to pin Arthur on the ropes and dominate the back end of the fight. And he was okay in the back end of the fight. So, I don't know. I thought it was a mixed bag. I thought Yarde was a lot better against Arthur in the third fight than he was against his previous opponent, whose name escapes me. He was some obscure Eastern European fighter who turned out to be a lot more capable than certainly Yarde expected. Okay, Kitagata says, and I'm going to say your first name is Tadayoshi Kitagata. Says, David throws a lot of shots, though. He's there to be hit. Yeah, he is there to be hit to some extent, 100%. Although I would say he's tightened up his defense a little bit over the past few years. David Benavidez has been improving. His defense has been improving. His offense has been improving. And he's always had good offense. Quick hands, throws a lot of shots, good stamina, good punch variety, unusual punch sequences. You know, he mixes up the sequence with which he throws punches to catch you off guard. He's a good fighter, David Benavidez. Shout out to Hulk Smash. All right, so let's move on from this story then. Ben Shalom, nobody cares about his predicament right now. I respect that. Move on to some heavyweight news. You guys want to hear some heavyweight news? Well, here we have it. Efe Ajagba and Frank Sanchez have been ordered to fight each other again. Okay, so this is a rematch. And it is heading to purse bids. So the IBF ordered Efe Ajagba Frank Sanchez rematch will be made available to the highest bidder. Boxing Scene has confirmed that the above-mentioned heavyweight title elimination contest is scheduled for an August 5th purse bid hearing. The designation was warranted after the two sides failed to reach terms during their assigned negotiation period. All involved parties can still attempt to come to terms prior to the start of the purse bid. All right. The first fight, of course, was several years ago. Frank Sanchez was able to drop Efe Ajagba en route to a points decision win. I think it was over 10 rounds rather than 12. Correct me if I'm wrong. And Frank Sanchez looked very promising at that stage. He was very quick in that fight. He showed explosiveness. He showed power. He showed boxing IQ, so on and so forth. Great movement. But this is one of those situations where the loser has ended up being in better form than the winner since that contest. Not like Efe Ajagba's been in scintillating form, but I would argue he's been in better form than Frank Sanchez. Frank Sanchez has basically been fighting in obscurity since then. And, apart from the fight he had against Ajit Kabayel, which he lost, right? Other than that, he's been fighting in obscurity against nondescript opposition. Efe Ajagba's been fighting better opposition. Okay, so Efe Ajagba coming off a win against Guido Vianello. He then went into the Martin Bakole fight, which I think he blatantly won, but the judges saw otherwise and scored it a majority draw. Ajagba showed me dimensions against Martin Bakole, which I'd never seen before. I didn't think he had those kind of dimensions. I thought biomechanically he wasn't the kind of guy capable of getting up on his toes and boxing on the back foot. Now, to be fair, he wasn't able to maintain that consistently for 10 rounds against Martin Bakole. He did it in spots, right? For the most part, he was moving around and sticking a jab and all this type of stuff. But there were other points in the fight, sections in the fight, where he was sat on the ropes, absorbing punishment, and not in a way where he was able to block most of the hard shots and then counter effectively. No, not like that at all. When he was on the ropes, he was absorbing punishment as in the shots were getting through and they were damaging him. He ended up with a bloody nose and all that kind of stuff when he was on the ropes against Martin Bakole. So I can only imagine it's because he's maybe not used to moving as much as he was moving in that fight, and his legs got tired and it just felt awkward for his body. But be that as it may, I still think he did enough to win that fight. I think I scored it 7 rounds to 3 for Efe Ajagba. Frank Sanchez coming off some obscure fight in Mexico, which he won in the 3rd round. And inactivity as well for Sanchez, of course. Since that Caballel fight, he hasn't really done much. So what do you guys think of this one? The rematch between Ajagba and Sanchez, could it be different this time? I think it possibly could be. If Sanchez has deteriorated sufficiently and Ajagba has improved sufficiently. I think Ajagba has improved. I don't think Frank Sanchez has improved. But has Ajagba improved enough to get revenge? What do you guys think in the chat? Shout out to O'Neal. Josh says, strange fight, I think. Why is Bakole not trying to right the wrong against Ajagba? Well, it's possible that Bakole wants to. I don't know. Then again, Bakole's never in shape, right? Derek Chisora was right to accost him as a fellow professional fighter and read him the riot act about his condition, even now. After losing to Joseph Parker, and obviously he took the Parker fight on ridiculously short notice. But in boxing, if you're a fighter like Martin Bakole, who's looking for an opportunity, you have to stay ready 365. Do you know what I mean? Just like Josh Padley stayed ready 365. He put up a much better display against Shakur Stevenson than Martin Bakole did against Joseph Parker. Obviously, he had a few extra days, Josh Padley, but he was clearly in much better shape relatively than Martin Bakole was in his heavyweight bout. So you got to stay ready. Martin Bakole just, yeah. You can't stay away from the refrigerator. Isaac says, Sanchez schools my Nigerian brother Efe again. That's right. Sanchez was supposed to fight Hrgovic. Well, originally, Bacoli was supposed to fight a Jagbar in an IBF final eliminator. That's what it was originally supposed to be. But then Martin Bacoli took the Parker fight, got himself stopped in 2 rounds, and it was thrown out then. He was no longer able to participate in an IBF final eliminator because of that loss. So he went on to fight a Jagbar anyway. I guess the Saudis offered a Jagbar enough of a financial incentive to forego his IBF final eliminator against somebody else. So he took the Bacoli fight, got a draw, and the IBF have seen fit to still make him eligible for that IBF final elimination. And so here he is fighting Frank Sanchez again. And again, as other people have pointed out, there was also a time when they were looking to match Hrgovic against Frank Sanchez, but Hrgovic went in a different direction and chose to take on David Adeleye, again, presumably for a load of money. Filip Hrgovic has basically said he was shocked and surprised at how much money he was being offered to fight David Adeleye, and he couldn't turn it down, basically. So that is what that is. And yeah, as Mark Hatch said there, Hrgovic Adeleye is the weirdest matchup. It is weird, but it kind of makes sense when you break it down, you know? It's a random matchup, but it kind of makes sense when you break it down. For David Adeleye, he was seemingly on the road to losing to Jamie Shakiva, who is, by global boxing standards, totally obscure. So Adeleye could have taken a rematch of him, or this fight with Filip Hrgovic, who's a much more high-profile fighter, for a lot more money and a lot more upside. So it makes sense from Adelaye's perspective, do you know what I mean? Because he could very conceivably lose a Jamie TKV rematch. And then where's he going to be, right? If he loses to Hrgovic, okay, it's a loss. But as long as he gives a good account of himself, he'll still raise his profile and potentially open himself up to more big paydays. So there's only upside in this, as far as I can see it, for David Adeleye in his current situation. For Filip Hrgovic, there's no upside at all other than the payday. If he beats Adeleye, they'll say, well, you're supposed to beat him. If he loses, it's disastrous. So, yeah, he better hope that the payday compensates for any potential slip-ups. All right, Star Fox is saying, big up all my Limehouse Bengalis. All right. You know, one thing I've always wanted to try is like Bengali fish curry, because they cook a lot of fish and stuff like that. Bangladeshi Bengali cuisine, as I understand it. And I like fish, so yeah. I heard their fish curry is great. Debiaka says, Hrgovic's overconfidence could creep back in. It very well could. And if he hasn't learned his lesson by now, with the overconfidence he showed in the Daniel Dubois fight, then he's a damn fool. He didn't appear overconfident against Joyce, but he'd fought Joyce before, so he knew the kind of heat that Joyce could bring. But against Adeleye, you know, yeah, the overconfidence could creep back in. Mr. Lucas says, Usyk ain't going to fight Atama. You man need to let that go. And by the way, folks, I just uploaded my latest film study on my Patreon page, where I make the case that Alexander Usyk is showing signs of deterioration. And I go through film footage from the first Anthony Joshua fight, which was 4 years ago or so, and his most recent fight, which was the Dubois rematch. And I compare the first rounds of those two fights. And unless my eyes are totally messed up and deceiving me, Usyk appears to have significantly deteriorated in terms of his athletic performance. Not just his foot movement, the amount he feints, and especially his head movement. He's far less prolific with the head movement now, and just the movement all round, than he was a few years ago. So in that film study, I show the videos of both fights, break it all down, and I also go into some of the mechanics of how Usyk was able to beat Daniel Dubois the second time earlier, because he really stood with him. But I don't think he stood with him as a strategic choice necessarily. I reckon he stood with him out of necessity because he can't move as much as he used to. But I break it all down in the film study on my Patreon page. You can access that on the boxing tier or on the whole shebang tier. So head on over to my Patreon page, links in the description if you want to check that out. Again, you get access to all my previous content on there, going back several years. No contract, no commitment, cancel at any time. You know the drill. Isaac says, we probably changed this style a little due to being heavier. Well, I think the being heavier is because he's older. I don't think he wants to be heavier. I think it's getting harder in those training camps because he's older, because you don't have as much energy when you get older. And the result of that is, well, yeah, you start putting on a few more pounds. The weight starts creeping up, and it has been creeping up for Usyk over the past few fights. The weight has been creeping up. Mr. Lucas says, I think Usyk looked good in the Fury rematch, looked way quicker than he did last time out. Well, another thing that comes into play is motivation. Right? Usyk says, I don't need motivation. I don't need motivation because I have discipline. Well, yeah, he's got discipline, but at the end of the day, he's a human being. And he is not going to feel the same butterflies. He's not going to feel the same sense of threat going in there against Daniel Dubois, who quit last time from a jab. He's not going to feel the same kind of threat as he felt from Tyson Fury. Especially since they were undisputed fights. So I think the level of adrenaline for the Fury fights would have been higher. And that adrenaline, that fear factor makes you sharper if you're an elite boxer like Alexander Usyk, right? Costamato used to talk about how fear was like fire. If you don't control your fear, it gets out of control and it will destroy you and everything around you. Whereas if you learn how to harness it, you can use it to your advantage, and Usyk is a perfect example of that. So, yeah, I think he was a lot sharper in both Fury fights than he was in that rematch with Dubois, because I think the adrenaline helped him to elevate his performances against Luke Partridge. I don't think he had that level of adrenaline against Daniel Dubois. And who would he have that level of adrenaline against? Do you know what I mean? How's he going to get up to the same emotional high as he was in those Partridge fights or even the AJ fights? Ocean Blue says, I definitely see the decline. Majority of people saying he looked good, better than ever. Could go on for years. That kind of talk makes things ripe for an upset. There were so many instances in that Dubois rematch where Dubois was literally millimeters away from landing clean right hands and left hooks. Millimeters away. And in fact, he did get caught clean a couple times by Dubois shots. And one of the crucial things, which I show in the film study I did on my Patreon page, is that Usyk gets trapped in the corners loads of times. It's only a 5-round fight. He gets trapped in the corners loads of times where he's actually not moving his head. He's just standing there with his gloves up, waiting to absorb Dubois' shots. It reminds me of Muhammad Ali in the latter stages of his career, because a young Ali had the legs to move away. Very rarely would you see him trapped on the ropes or trapped in a corner absorbing shots on the gloves. But when his legs started to go, that's when he would lay up on the ropes. And Usyk was trapped in corners and on the ropes far more in this 5-round Dubois fight than I've seen in any of his other fights before. And to me, that's a clear sign of the aging, of the legs slowing down and not having the same energy levels as he used to have. Mr. Lucas says he's got a good chin, to be fair. Yeah, Usyk does have a good chin. Usyk is just the all-rounder. He ticks every box, you know? People used to say he can't really punch. Well, tell Daniel Dubois that. Tell Daniel Dubois that he can't really punch. Mark Hatch says, Hatman, do you think Parker can cause the upset then? I think anybody could cause the upset at this stage. Because, again, it's a combination of how's Usyk really going to get up for these fights? And how rapidly is he going to deteriorate physically? We don't know. I would still pick Usyk to beat Joseph Parker, right? If he were to fight him next. I'd pick Usyk to beat probably anybody if he was to fight them next. But the longer he goes on, in my head, the higher the risk is of him losing. And potentially losing to somebody that you wouldn't expect. Muro's man says underrated power because he doesn't necessarily look for power. That's right. He varies up the shots. He varies up the power in the shots. Isaac says Hatman has officially made Fury's name Partridge. What I like is when other people away from my channel also start calling him Luke Partridge. I know it's all over X and in various comment sections and stuff like that, but I would like more, YouTubers and other people to also call him Luke Partridge. I'd like other YouTubers to start calling him that as well. Shout out to Mr. Classic Metal. He says, I'd say that Usyk has shown that he's quite durable. Very durable. Very durable. Ocean Blue says, imagine if they call him Partridge in public. Copen says, Dubois' resistance to quitting is getting worse. Striker says, the only danger with the Parker fight is that Parker brings no edge or needle to the fight, and it may lull Usyk into a full sense of security. But even that's a big if, and that's a great point, Striker, by the way. Yeah, that's a great point. Tony S says, who in your opinion gives Usyk his toughest fight when looking around at the heavyweights at the moment? Maybe Caballero. Maybe Caballero's a bit fresher than Parker. He's a bit more naturally aggressive. And he's got that body attack. So maybe Caballero. I'd say Caballero, Parker are the main two guys now. Maybe Jalalov. And beyond that, I don't know, maybe the likes of Moses Italma in a few fights' time. Somebody just mentioned Moses Italma there. Right now, I'd still make Usyk the favorite in that fight. But Usyk would be going up against the guy who's faster than him for the first time in years. When's the last time that Usyk fought somebody faster than himself? I have to think back now. When's the last time Usyk fought somebody faster than him? Tabiso Machunu, maybe? Might have been the last time. And he chewed up Machunu without any problems whatsoever. But Machunu is no Moses Italma. He doesn't have that kind of punching power or size. Machunu's a little short guy. So I want to say it was Machunu was the last one, the last time that Usyk was in there with somebody quicker than him. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, what if Italma gets hit with Ivan? Well, as I say, I would expect Usyk to win if they were to fight next. And Ivan, I'm sure, would come into play. Then we'd find out whether these rumors about Italma's chin are true or not. Sazad says, Breedis. Now, Breedis ain't faster than Usyk. Or even as fast. Now, I'd say Machunu was faster than Usyk. At least in terms of hand speed. Machunu was very quick. Hand speed in his prime. Very, very fast. Very explosive. Shout out to Guzzi. Yeah, Hunter early was fast as well. Maybe he had a slight speed advantage on Usyk when they fought. So you'd have to go back to the cruiserweight days. So it might be a bit jarring for Alexander Usyk to get in there against the Talma and experience superior speed again for the first time in many years. Exactamundo says Parker causes problems early on for Usyk with his speed, but can Parker outbox him for 12 rounds? I don't think so. And it's not like he's got Ivan up his sleeve. I'd lump it on Usyk to win. And me too, because at the end of the day, Joseph Parker couldn't outbox Dylan White. He couldn't outbox Joe Joyce. Think about that, folks. He couldn't outbox Dylan White, who's got some of the slowest feet in the heavyweight division. Some of the poorest coordination and poorest footwork out of the top heavyweights. And Joseph Parker, who was much younger and quicker then, couldn't outbox Dylan White. He couldn't outbox Joe Joyce. So is he really going to outbox Usyk? I mean, anything is possible in the heavyweight division, but in my mind, there's very little chance of that happening. Jackson Fairweather says Yard would kill Buatsi in the ring. Okay, hopefully we get to see it and find out. Isaac says, I think Parker is more complete now, though. All right. D-Man said, shout out to D-Man for the super chat. He says, Parker got really lucky versus Bacoli. You could see it that way for sure. You know, Bacoli wasn't in any kind of shape at all. Maybe the payday from the Anderson fight led him to basically go down the same road as a lot of Cuban heavyweights have in the past. People like Odlanier Solis. As soon as he landed on American soil and tasted some freedom in American dollars, he was like, you know, the ever-expanding man. Man was expanding faster than the universe, Odlanier Solis. And Martin Bacoli, who's obviously from Congo, reminds me a little bit of those Cuban heavyweights, you know, from back in the day. Shout out to Ocean Blue for the super chat. He says, is it me or does Vidal Sassoon fantasize about training a fighter to beat Usyk for some reason? Vidal Sassoon being Ben Davison. Bro Cream Ben, Head and Shoulders, whatever you want to call him. Does he fantasize about getting somebody to beat Usyk? Yeah, probably. The question is why? Is it because Usyk beat his good friend Partridge? Or is it because he just sees it as a challenge and he thinks in his head that he knows how to do it and he wants credit for being the trainer that masterminds Usyk's first defeat? Is it just like a professional challenge type of scenario? Do you know what I mean? Or is it revenge for his mate Partridge? Who knows? Shout out to Ocean Blue for the super chat. Crazy Pickney says, do you think it's because Usyk has realized he doesn't need to be as prolific with his head movement and his feints? No, I don't. I don't. Because if you look at that Dubois fight, turn the sound off. Usyk was having to absorb a lot more shots on his gloves. And he was getting pinned in the corners and on the ropes. And Usyk doesn't like to block shots if he can slip them. And in my opinion, in my estimation, he's blocking more shots now. He's blocking a lot more shots now against Dubois. He's a heavy-handed guy. Not because he wants to, not because it's a strategic thing, but because he doesn't have the energy to move as much as he used to at his age. All the wear and tear on his body. This guy had over 200 amateur fights. Do you know what I mean? This guy's been boxing and doing road work and crazy, insane, sadistic training camps for how many years now? He's a human being. It's going to take its toll on him physically. He's not going to be able to do the same things forever. The decline isn't going to happen overnight. People perceive decline to happen overnight because a guy keeps winning and they're ignoring the signs that he's declining. And then when he loses, he went old, he got old overnight. Well, not really. The signs were there if you were paying attention. And to me, I see the signs of Usyk's decline. I saw the signs of his decline even in the Fury fights. The version of Usyk who fought Fury, that's not the same version who fought AJ. And I did another film study previously comparing the Usyk who fought AJ to the Usyk who fought Fury. And I'm telling you, there's even decline from then. I think part of the reason that, in my opinion, Usyk was better in the first AJ fight than he has been in any subsequent fight at heavyweight since is, yes, he was younger and fresher, but also that was the first elite fighter that he'd fought at heavyweight. Remember, he was coming off Chad Witherspoon. That was kind of like a shoulder shrugger of a performance. Derek Chisora gave him a tough time. So part of, he might have in his own mind been nervous about getting in there against Anthony because he didn't know what to expect at the elite level at heavyweight. And to substantiate my point, after the fight, when they asked Usyk about, what AJ was like and was it as hard as he expected, Alexander Usyk said, no, I expected it to be tougher. Do you know what I mean? So he anticipated something far more tumultuous than he actually got. And because he was anticipating such a torrid fight, I think that elevated him. Again, the adrenaline levels, the pushing himself even further in training camp, the anticipation of being in there against an elite heavyweight. Of course, he'd fought elite cruiserweights, he'd sparred heavyweights, he'd fought huge guys in the WSB and all that. But in the pro ring, do you know what I mean? So I don't think he ever really got up the same mentally and emotionally for a heavyweight fight subsequent to that first AJ fight. He still got up for them, obviously, but yeah. Shout out to Hero Protagonist for the super chat. He says, if Dubois got up, could the tables have turned? Well, yeah, potentially. If you land a big enough shot. Alexander Usyk's only a human being, right? The potential's always there. But the probability would be that no, Usyk would have laid him out cold maybe if Dubois got up. Because if you watch the final punch land, if you watch the exchange, because it's an exchange, Dubois gets off the canvas and he decides he's going to swing it out, right? And basically the reason that Usyk won is encapsulated in that final exchange, because Usyk is using his feet, right? Dubois gets up, Usyk goes in, and Usyk throws out a right jab, and he's trying to trigger Dubois to throw a punch before he throws a shot. And so he triggers Dubois, then he throws a left hand down the middle, okay? All Dubois is doing is throwing wide hooks. He's not throwing straight shots. And that's one of his downfalls, particularly against Usyk, because Usyk can see that a mile off. He's like, okay, I'm going to throw straight shots down the middle and looping shots around the side to confuse you. So he triggers Dubois to throw, hits him with a straight left hand. Dubois comes back with a shot, and Usyk takes a step out of the pocket, a little half step out, and Dubois' shot hits Usyk on the shoulder or on the arm. That's when Usyk steps in with a looping left hand, because literally a second earlier, he hit him with a straight left hand. He then goes in with a looping left hand when Dubois' head is in the air. Usyk's head, his chin is literally super glued to his chest when he throws that looping left hand. Go watch it. Not only is Usyk's chin super glued to his chest when he throws that looping left hand, his right glove is also up. This is how technically proficient the guy is. Even in what seems like wild exchange like that. No. Usyk is doing all the technical things correctly when his opponent is not. And that is the reason, part of the reason that if Daniel Dubois got up from that second knockdown and continued, I think the overwhelming likelihood is he would have got sparked out cold. Because, yeah, there's always a chance he lands a big shot. But Usyk is so technically proficient, even in situations like that, and even in a trade-up. His chin is down on his chest, and his hand that he's not using is like super glued up to his forehead or something. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that it would have just got worse for Dubois if he continued. So I'm not even having a go at him for not continuing, for quitting, because that's what he did. He quit. I'm not having a go at him for that. But it's a fact of the matter. It's a fact of life that some fighters simply won't quit. You know? Some fighters are mentally tougher than Daniel Dubois, and he'll be going up against some guys like that. I mean, Usyk was one of them, obviously. But there'll be fighters in future. I mean, retrospectively, we have to say Anthony Joshua was tougher mentally than Daniel Dubois. And Anthony Joshua isn't the mentally toughest top 10 heavyweight out there, is he? But compared to Daniel Dubois, when I say mental toughness, there are different types of mental toughness. I would say Dubois is more naturally confident than AJ. But AJ, for whatever reason, has less quit in him. I'm not saying AJ's got no quit in him, but he's got less quit in him than Daniel Dubois. We've seen that now. Shout out to D-Man for the super chat. He says, do you think Usyk's tenacity is overlooked? I would say yes. Particularly before the Partridge fights, because I remember talking to some people about Usyk. I think it was after the first AJ fight. And they were still kind of skeptical about Alexander Usyk and how good he was, especially when compared to, you know, fighters of bygone eras, the likes of Evander Holyfield. And so there was somebody that was a member of my Element group a while back. And he was insisting that Usyk will never have the level of success at heavyweight that Holyfield had because he's not as tenacious. And I was like, where have you got this idea that he's not as tenacious as Holyfield? You know, where have you got this idea from? Generally, those little guys, right? Relatively little compared to modern day heavyweights. They've been fighting big guys for years and years and years. And if they were not tenacious, they never would have had the success they've had. Usyk has been fighting big guys in the amateurs and the WSB. He's been in there with big guys in sparring. And Usyk's mentality is very similar to Holyfield's mentality. He basically has the mentality of standing up to the bully, standing up to the big guy. You know, he sees it as a challenge. He's that personality type. He's actually the opposite of his countryman Vladimir Klitschko. Vladimir Klitschko is the bully type who doesn't like it being stuck on him. Usyk is the little guy that will stick it on the bully. It's two opposite personality types. You know, Vladimir Klitschko is the guy who needs everything to be absolutely correct. In order for him to feel comfortable, he needs to be in his comfort zone. Usyk's the guy who'll go on the road and beat you in your backyard. Totally opposite personality types, you know? So Usyk is tremendously tenacious, and yeah, I definitely see it the way you described it. I think his tenacity is underestimated. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, most sadistic boxers past and present. Most sadistic boxers, I guess you mean in the ring rather than outside the ring, right? Because if it's outside the ring, you'd probably have to say that scumbag who killed Max Kellerman's brother. But inside the ring, you'd probably have to go with the likes of Mike Tyson, who was sadistic. George Foreman. Deontay Wilder, you could throw him in there because they were genuinely trying to catch bodies. They were genuinely trying to put people in the grave. Present, who would you say is a sadistic boxer? They don't verbalize their sadistic tendencies to the same extent as the Mike Tysons and certainly the Deontay Wilders used to. So I'm not sure about current guys, fighters that are sadistic. Yeah, I can't think of any current guys. Obviously, Wilder's still around, but he's not the same as he used to be. So I don't know. But past, that's what I can say. Mike Tyson, George Foreman, Deontay Wilder. Shout out to GMS Nightmare for the super chat. He says, Prime John Fury versus Johnny Fisher. I'll go with Johnny Fisher. Prime John Fury couldn't punch. I think he had 0 KO wins or 1 KO win in all his fights. I think he had like 13 fights or something. So I go with a Prime Johnny Fisher, to be honest. Over Johnny Partridge. Shout out to GMS Nightmare. Big up Mr. Classic Metal for the super chat. He says, can you name the heavyweight champs throughout history who were most proficient technically? So Usyk is there. Usyk might be the number one. But Usyk is there. Vladimir Klitschko. The Manny Stewart version of Vladimir Klitschko. He was very technically proficient. More technically proficient than his brother, who was more reflexive and stuff like that. Vladimir was more fundamentally sound than Vitaly. Lennox Lewis has got to be there. Evander Holyfield was good technically. I mean, he showed that in the Mike Tyson fights in particular. But he was reckless, you know? So he knew how to fight a good technical fight, but he was reckless with it. And he wasn't as defensively good as somebody like an Usyk, because Usyk knows, it's not just where to place your hands, because Holyfield was very good at putting his hands in the right place to block shots and exchange and stuff like that. Again, he showed it against Tyson, but he wasn't anywhere near as good as Usyk in terms of moving his feet and moving his upper body as well after throwing shots to put himself out of the line of fire of getting hit back. Holyfield wasn't anywhere near as good at that as Usyk is. But you could still say he was a good technical heavyweight. I mean, Larry Holmes was a good technical heavyweight. Ali, not really. Ali was more like reflexes and heart and speed and all that kind of stuff. He wasn't a great technical fighter, Ali, to be honest. Sonny Liston was pretty good technically, but these guys aren't on the level of Usyk's technique. Joe Louis and so on. Usyk might be the number one in terms of just doing everything correctly from a technical perspective. Shout out to Mr. Classic Metal. Shout out to Striker for the super chat. He says, if Usyk retires undefeated, where does it leave Marciano's legacy? Marciano's whole all-time great status hinged on the whole undefeated thing. Yeah, I think it leaves it out in the cold. To be honest, if Usyk retires undefeated, people are hardly going to talk about Rocky Marciano anymore. Because he's just so much better than Rocky Marciano. I mean, so many heavyweight champions in the past, in my opinion, are much better than Rocky Marciano. But again, he always had that undefeated thing going for him. But if Usyk does it, then Marciano no longer has that going for him. So, yeah, I think people will barely talk about the guy anymore. Nothing against Rocky Marciano, by the way. Whenever I mention this stuff, people think I've got something against him. Got nothing against the guy. Loads of heart. Good puncher for his size and all that kind of thing. But, yeah, I don't think he was one of the top 10 greatest heavyweights or anything like that. Particularly when you consider the fact that he's not even a heavyweight by today's standards at all. He's literally a light heavyweight by today's standards. He was weighing 185 pounds. Remember, they were weighing in on the day of the fight during Marciano's era. If you're weighing in at 185 pounds on the day of the fight, that means today you'd be a light heavyweight. Literally. Shout out to Mr. Classic Metal. He says, some US channels claim that Usyk isn't that special compared to heavyweights from past eras. Yeah. I'm not surprised they're saying that. And they're saying it for various reasons. For some people, like Simon Jordan, it's just a nostalgia thing. Yeah, it's just rose-tinted glasses for the past, because Lennox Lewis would make mincemeat of Alexander Usyk. And at the end of the day, we don't have a time machine to send Usyk back to the 90s and find out. But they have this very dismissive attitude where they reflexively just, Usyk could never be able to live in the 90s. They don't even think about it that deeply, it seems. Even Duke McKenzie's guilty of it, right? And Duke McKenzie's fantastic when it comes to making predictions. So there's a lot of rose-tinted glasses going on when people say stuff like that. And for other people, it is a tribal ethnicity type thing, a racial thing. It is. Let's just be real. And, it works with other fighters as well. I mean, with Rocky Marciano, a lot of the reason that he was held aloft as high as he was for racial reasons, And the reverse of that would be Alexander Usyk's achievements and his abilities being downplayed by some people, also for racial reasons. So these things exist. People have their biases and whatnot. I try and be objective and take all of that stuff out of it. Do you know what I mean? Take all that color stuff out of it and just look at the skill and the technique of the fighters and who they fought and all that type of business. I don't see Alexander Usyk being anything less than a top 4 heavyweight in any era. Personally, I just don't see it. I don't see how this guy's not a top 4 heavyweight in any era in boxing. That's my opinion. Shout out to GMS Nightmare for the super chat. He says, which heavyweight score highest and lowest in an IQ test? Are you talking about boxing IQ or actual IQ? In boxing IQ, which heavyweights would score highest? Usyk's going to be very high. Lennox Lewis would be very high. Larry Holmes, Muhammad Ali. I mean, so many of them would be very, very high in terms of boxing IQ. And the lowest, damn, which are the dumbest, which are the heavyweight champions with the lowest boxing IQ? Oliver McCall wasn't very high up in terms of boxing IQ. Maybe Mike Weaver. Trevor Berbick, guys like that. They were kind of crude heavyweights who weren't that bright, and they got, I mean, in boxing terms, they weren't bright in the ring, and they got by on being just tough and gutsy, you know? But they didn't have the highest ring IQ. Shout out to GMS Nightmare. Big up Danny, he says, does boxing attract or repel psychopaths? It's a difficult question to answer because I think where boxing is more likely to attract psychopaths is in the business side of it. Because the boxing business is so unregulated compared to other sports and other industries. So, you know, psychopaths are often opportunistic and they like the idea of being able to exploit people. So boxing probably attracts psychopaths more on the business side than on the boxing side. I mean, there are going to be some, of course, who are attracted to the boxing side, but that's contingent on them actually being good. You know, a psychopath might try their hand at boxing and realize they're rubbish and think, okay, F this for a game of soldiers. I'm going to do something else. So it's contingent on them being good. Jelly Mold says, surely Vlad Klitschko an actual IQ politician, speaks 7 languages, chess player. Is Vlad Klitschko a politician? I know Vitali's a politician. Is Vlad a politician as well? I don't think politicians have to have a particularly high IQ to be honest with you. But speaking the 7 languages and all that kind of stuff, being a chess player, that more speaks towards IQ. But being a politician, yeah, I don't really I don't think having a really high IQ is necessarily a requisite of being a politician. Shout out to Cash for the super chat. He says, I get irritated when fighters today are seen as hype jobs when they lose, but fans will worship old fighters that lost several fights in their prime and forgive the L and act like the L isn't important. That's a great point. That's what rose-tinted glasses can do, you know? And I always talk about the 90s because I remember in the 90s how dismissive and, let's just say dismissive, the majority of boxing fans were about the heavyweights around at the time. They were acting like Lennox Lewis was rubbish. They were acting like Holyfield was just this, pumped up cruiserweight who's not going to stand any chance when he gets in there against a real heavyweight. It was all very dismissive, But with the passage of time, people reminisce and look back on the old days, and they totally forget about how much they used to slag off certain fighters. And they're like, oh, you never see fighters around like the ones back in my days. And apparently they used to do it in the Ali era too. When Muhammad Ali was about, people, of an older generation who grew up on Joe Louis were equally as dismissive as of Ali. They would say, oh, he would never have lived with Joe Louis. So, yeah, people tend to be like that, Shout out to Costanza versus Kramer. Says, I think you missed 2 previous super chats. Did I? Let me have a look. Oh, excuse me. Adam Folks for the super chat. Big up Adam Folks. I did miss your super chat. He says Prime Khan and Hatton versus Prime Taylor and Cattrall. Okay. Prime Khan versus Taylor and Prime Hatton versus Cattrall. I'm going to take Khan over Taylor. And I'm going to take Cattrall over Hatton. And the reason I take Khan over Taylor, despite the fact that Taylor, undisputed and he achieved more than Amir Khan. Khan was very good against southpaws. Very good against southpaws. That was one thing which you could almost depend on. When Amir Khan fought a southpaw, he was going to open up a can of whoop-ass. So I go with Khan over Josh Taylor. I mean, obviously Khan was very, very chinny. And if Taylor managed to land the right shots, it's good night Vienna. But Khan went in there against people like Louis Collazo, who was a real big, strong southpaw. He dealt with him, and that guy tried to rough Khan up. He totally outboxed Devin Alexander when Alexander had gone in there and mashed up Marcus Maidana, another guy that Khan fought. So whenever Khan came up against southpaws, he just dealt with them comfortably. I don't recall any southpaw bothering him at all in a fight. So I'll probably go Khan over Taylor and Cattrall over Hatton. That would be my take. Another one from Costanza versus Kramer. He says, does current Usyk beat Fury in a trilogy? It depends on what Fury's got left, As much as I think Usyk is deteriorating, I don't think Fury's getting better. You know what I mean? Fury ain't getting better either. So it's tough to say. I'd like to see Fury back to see how he looks. Because, yeah, he's not active. But at the same time, he's not taking damage in training camps. His body's not taking wear and tear. And it's tough to know whether whether the inactivity will play a bigger role on how well Fury can perform in his next fight. Whether it's the inactivity or the rest, It could be a positive or a negative in the relatively short term. So I'm not sure. I'm going to say if neither of them has deteriorated to a greater extent than the other, then Usyk wins again. You'd need Usyk to deteriorate more than Fury for Fury to win, in my opinion. Because Usyk has downloaded all the data. He knows Fury inside out now. I mean, look at the way people don't talk about this. Look at the way Usyk took away Fury's uppercut in the rematch. Where was Fury's uppercut? Did he even land it once? That was his best shot in the first fight. Alexander Usyk downloaded the data. In fact, he made the adjustment in the first fight after he got caught with them uppercuts in the mid-rounds. I think the last time he allowed Fury to catch him with a real solid uppercut was round 7. After that, he was gone. There was no uppercut anymore for Tyson Fury. Usyk made the adjustment in fight. And he went back and he studied the film footage of that first fight going into the rematch. He started studying footage of the first fight like 2 weeks after. While Tyson Fury was face planting from being drunk outside of a pub, Usyk was studying footage of the first fight, making adjustments already in the gym. That's how meticulous this guy is. That's how obsessive this guy is. So he will have downloaded data from both fights. He took Fury's uppercut away. Unless he's deteriorated more than Fury, then he wins again. Long story short. So shout out to Costanza versus Kramer. Shout out to Adam Folks. Shout out to Mr. Classic Metal. GMS Nightmare. Danny says, okay, I've read that one. Cash. Costanza versus Kramer, big up. Okay, yeah, he was talking about the super chats. Big up to you. Indeed, Goozy, he made the adjustments to the body shots as well. He took Fury's body shot because Fury was basically throwing an uppercut to the body and an uppercut to the chin. Those are the shots that he did damage with in the first Usyk fight. Usyk took those punches away from him. And he actually did it midway through the first fight. And just refined that adjustment in the lead up to the second fight. Kylie says IQ is such an abstract thing because there are so many ways to interpret intelligence. Absolutely. I don't think IQ is any comprehensive measure of intelligence at all. Because obviously IQ doesn't really factor in emotional intelligence. There are a lot of people who are academically intelligent and all that kind of thing, but they're socially awkward. You know, they don't understand social cues. I guess we're talking about maybe in some cases people on the spectrum who may be very highly educated and would test highly on an IQ thing, but you put them in a room full of people and they wouldn't know how to maneuver through a room full of people. You know, they'd be lost and they wouldn't understand the social cues and maybe they'd get scammed easily and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? So there are different forms of intelligence. I mean, you look at the likes of Luke Partridge, Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury is very wily. You know, he has a decent amount of, I want to say, social intelligence, which allows him to be manipulative and conniving and all that type of stuff. Yeah. Danny says IQ is correlated with having or not having an internal monologue. Is it? I'm pretty sure. I mean, are you saying that people with an internal monologue are going to have a higher IQ and people without one are lower, or the opposite? Because I'm sure there are people with no internal monologue that have a very high IQ. Yeah, completely agree, D-Man. Abstract thinking is important too. People who can see past what's in front of them or seeing patterns where other people can't. Samil says politicians are extremely intelligent on either side. What do you mean by that? On either side. Isaac says politicians are good in social intelligence. Some of them. Danny says higher IQs have internal monologue. I'm not sure whether that's true. I think there are people, maybe even autistic people, with very high IQs that perhaps don't have an internal monologue at all. People whose minds function like a computer, you know? Well, there you go. Exactamundo says that he has 0 internal monologue, didn't realize other people heard their own voices talking to them, and he's got a high IQ. I think evil Uncle Phil has hit the nail on the head. Politicians just articulate themselves well, usually. They aren't that smart, or they aren't necessarily that smart. Some politicians are actually very smart, but I don't think having a high IQ and being genuinely smart is a requisite of becoming a politician. The number one thing, and I know this is kind of a cliche, right? But seriously, the number one requirement for being a politician is being a good liar. If you can lie effortlessly, without shame, then you've basically met the number one criteria for being a politician. You have to be able to just lie easily and effortlessly all the time. Contradict yourself and just lie your way out of every situation. It's like an art form in politics to be able to lie and lie and lie. That's the number one requirement. It's not IQ and all this other stuff. It's how good a liar are you, and how good are you at talking your way out of your lies? Because that's like the skill that politicians have, is lying and talking their way out of their lies. That's what it's all about. That's what they go to the debating societies and debating clubs for, right? They learn how to worm their way out of lies, and that's what they do there, you know? They learn how to never answer things. They learn how to never give a straight answer. Yeah, politicians always do that. You used to have a man like Jeremy Paxman, you know, who used to grill politicians and whatever. And the politicians would be like squirming and lying, and he'd ask them a straight question and they'd find a way not to answer it straight. It's unbelievable. Indeed, Kylie says politicians can say a lot without saying anything at all. These are the talents. These are the skills that political parties are really looking for. Yeah. Skills in deception, word salad,ry to invent a word, you know. They specialize in waffle and spinning things, right? They're all spin doctors. They specialize in spinning things to look good or spinning things to look bad, depending on what the agenda of the party is. Gorguga says IQ test is somewhat pseudoscientific. Yes, because you're interpreting human intelligence. You know, you can't really quantify human intelligence. You can't really quantify it. You can gauge it to some extent, but you can't get, you know, scientific like you can with mathematics or something, you know? Because you can interpret how intelligent somebody is as far as responding to certain situations, and the human mind is an extremely complex thing. Human society is very complex. So it isn't strictly a scientific thing, you know, IQ. Just as psychology is not a real science, not hard science, because you can't quantify human emotions. You can't quantify human thoughts. You can't weigh, measure, or count love. You can't weigh, measure, or count fear. Do you know what I mean? So that's why psychology is not classed as a hard science, because it's too subjective. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, have you done an IQ test? I did one and scored 135. I'm pretty sure I did back in the days. I've got no idea what I scored, but I've never been particularly interested, and you could tell from the conversation, in IQ tests and IQ scores. So I've never really been bothered to do another one, but I'm pretty sure I must have done one at some point online, you know? Oh, wow. Evil Uncle Phil says, I think Warren blocked Shalom joining the zone. Now that sounds possible. That sounds possible. That sounds possible. Cash says, how do you not have an internal monologue? How do you think then? Well, we assume that robots don't think, right? Or robots don't have an internal monologue, excuse me, but they can still do calculations in their minds. Computers don't necessarily, computers are not conscious as we understand it, but they can still do calculations and figure things out and so on and so forth. And that's the mystery of the internal monologue. That's the mystery even of consciousness, self-awareness, being sentient. Why does it exist? when it doesn't necessarily need to. Mr. Classic Metal says, actually, there is a direct correlation between high IQ and maths. People who are extremely good at maths invariably have above average IQ. This speaks to what I was saying earlier on. You could have an autistic savant that is really good at maths, and perhaps they have a high IQ as well, but their intelligence is going to be potentially quite low in other areas. So this is why I say that an IQ test isn't really a comprehensive measure of somebody's intelligence, because there are different forms of intelligence, emotional intelligence and so on. And emotional intelligence, depending on, let's say, the field of work that you're in, might be more important than other forms of intelligence, Somebody mentioned there that politicians have a good level of social intelligence. Yeah, some of them do. Some of them do. The best manipulators do. They can read the room and they can, judge public mood, and they know exactly which hat to put on to please the crowd at that moment. Yeah, so they use emotional intelligence, social intelligence for manipulative purposes. Yes. Evil Uncle Phil says, if GBM and other boxing shows that aren't as popular can be on DAZN, boxer meet the criteria, I definitely think some foul play happened behind the scenes. And it's a very, very interesting possibility that you raised there. Very interesting possibility. Is Bricktop blocking Ben Shalom joining DAZN? It's a possibility, but at the same time, do DAZN have enough slots available for Ben Shalom, given the fighters he has? But I don't know, it's a very real possibility that you're right, because basically what it could do is force the fighters that Shalom has in his stable to leave and join Frank Warren. And maybe that's the play, Maybe he's trying to squeeze all them fighters out of Boxer into his stable. And at that point, when Boxer have nobody left, maybe then they'll be allowed to join DAZN. Maybe they'll bring the what's his name? Forget the guy's name now. The Lion King guy, Steve Robinson. Maybe they'll bring him back. Mr. Classic Metal says the IQ test may not be comprehensive, but it is a solid method to measure logical reasoning, mathematical aptitude, spatial visualization, processing speed, and working memory. Yeah, it's like you've described a diagnostic test for a computer, So, and I think that probably sums it up well. If you have a computer-like ability to do calculations and all that type of business, that's what we're measuring with IQ. But there are subtleties in the human mind, human interactions. There is a intuitive element that human beings have that computers don't have to the same extent. And it's in these areas where you also have types of intelligence, So, yeah, there are different kinds of intelligence, but what I will say is somebody could test very high as far as IQ, and they might not have the ability to think outside the box. That's what I'll say. Because, innovators in the field of science, in particular, are always people that are able to actually challenge the orthodoxy and the status quo. Whereas a lot of really learned, high IQ, credentialed individuals, PhDs and stuff like that, they tend to be more dogmatic thinkers. They tend to just stick to the orthodoxy and not really push against it and challenge it. So for me, an aspect of intelligence in a more holistic way would be how well somebody is able to actually critique the status quo of anything. Because that's how you get progress in any field, in science, in, wherever, is when people start testing the boundaries of what they're told. And that's why change in any academic field it usually happens slowly and painfully because of this, because of the dogmatic nature of human beings in general, including very educated human beings. Most people are dogmatic. Yeah, they like dogma. Dogma gives people emotional, psychological comfort and certainty. They don't like uncertainty. So me, I would factor that in to a more comprehensive measure of intelligence. Because you look at, again, trailblazers in science, and they're always people who were met with scorn and ridicule and hostility when they come onto the scene, right? In a major way in science. They get attacked by their peers. Danny says, Hatman, people who score low on IQ tests struggle with hypothetical questions. If you said, if Dubois fought Ali, who would win? They'll respond, but they didn't. Well, put it this way. Hang on, I got distracted by somebody else's comment there. Morozman says, depends on how we define intelligence, to be honest. The type of intelligence IQ measures brings tangible value to the real world. Innovators may not be dogmatic, but they are high IQ nonetheless. Well, I'm not saying that people with high IQ are, all dogmatic. I'm saying that most people are dogmatic. High IQ or low IQ, most of them are dogmatic, right? But the real trailblazers and innovators among the high IQ types are the ones who have more than just high IQ. They also have this intuitive aspect to their psyche. Do you know what I mean? And that's what separates them from other high IQ individuals. They're able to go beyond the computer brain of a lot of high IQ individuals, It's kind of like in the movie The Matrix. What separates the machines from Neo is that Neo has this human aspect of creativity, imagination, where he's able to bend the rules and break the rules and all this type of stuff. This is, and to some extent, an intuitive ability, yeah? And the really special individuals are high IQ, yes, but they also have this extra intuitive sense about them. And at the same time, here's one thing I would also say. Philosophy, right? There have been many philosophers over the centuries. Philosophers are often people who do not have the same level of IQ as, a mathematics type, right? Their IQ might not be that high. It's usually high, but not as high as some of these, on the spectrum mathematics types who or some type of mathematics savant, and they're great in engineering and all this type of stuff. But the philosopher has a more fluid mind, right? And that fluid mind can perceive things and see things and intuit things that the more rigid mathematical mind can't. You know, and that's why you need things like philosophers and stuff like that. When people still talk about them today, you know, they talk about Plato and Socrates and stuff like that, because philosophers, again, think outside the box. D-Man says, top-end mathematicians are philosophers in their own way. They question things about the universe. Some of them. I mean, like, the ones who are in the field of, like, quantum physics, they tend to be more open-minded. And they tend to push the boundaries and stuff, but within reason still, right? They're still confined by a scientific orthodoxy. Yes, it sounds like a contradiction in terms, but it's a reality. There is a scientific orthodoxy, because whenever you have orthodoxy, you have dogma, and the true essence and spirit of science is supposed to be the antithesis of dogma. Science is supposed to be never-ending inquiry where basically all positions are provisional. That's what science is supposed to be, because that's what lays the ground and opens the door for constant innovation and discovery, is when everything's provisional and therefore everything is allowed to be questioned and tested. But because of human nature, in practice, that's not the case. And in practice, you have this orthodoxy, which is like the new version of the flipping clergy or something, where you have all this dogma that comes into play. That's what human beings are innately like. They're dogmatic. So even if you are a top-end mathematician and you're into, you know, quantum physics and all that type of stuff, you're still having to deal with a framework of dogma around you in the scientific and mathematical world, you know, which is going to be very lateral thinkers, which is going to be very frustrating if you're somebody like that, you know, dealing with dogma in the world of science. A shout out to Danny for the super chat. It says, type into chat GPT, how do 80 versus 100 versus 130 IQ think? So I guess you're saying the lower IQ test scores are going to equate to people who struggle with abstract logic and stuff like that. Jamstar says, so when are we going to Mars? Who knows? No, I've never actually used Chat GPT, Wenching. Never actually used it yet. Evil Uncle Phil says, Chat GPT is an agent, so many people are giving it all their information. It's a two-way thing, innit? They're collecting data all the time. Data collection is like big business, you know? The collection and then subsequent selling of data. Massive business. People are making billions, maybe trillions out of selling data. So yes, all of these companies have got, or at least many of these companies, have got an incentive to collect your data. Yep, as Lewis says there, big data is real. Your data is valuable to all these companies, advertisers, governments, think tanks, so on and so forth. Cash says, happening. Have you heard about the UK Online Safety Act? Yes, I'm very aware of it. And all I can tell you is make sure you have a good VPN to circumvent a lot of that stuff. I actually have multiple layers of VPNs that I often use, you know? There are VPNs on certain browsers, for example, and on top of that, a dedicated VPN, onion browsers, and all sorts of other stuff, right? Callie says Opera has a built-in VPN. Yeah, but I wouldn't trust Opera personally. Opera is owned by the Chinese. Opera was okay as far as, privacy when it was still owned by, is it a Norwegian company or a Swedish company? It was some company in Northern Europe. But after it got bought out by the Chinese, terms of service changed and yeah, I wouldn't use Opera or trust their VPN if you're looking for privacy, to be honest. Just my opinion. I'm no tech expert, but, And I like Opera. In terms of user interface, Opera's actually my favorite browser. I like the interface, Warren Williams says, Hatman, was you born this smart or did you become this smart? Did you go to a grammar school, university? Because haven't heard anyone on the internet who thinks out the box like you. All I can tell you is that when I was a young kid, I used to drive my parents up the flipping wall asking questions about everything. I would literally, anywhere we would go, I would ask questions about everything. Anything I saw on television, constant questions. And I got 5 brothers, right? They weren't asking all these questions. So they are typical of most people. Whereas I would just constantly ask questions, drive my parents up the wall. I was just thirsty to learn as much as possible from everything around me. Outside of a school environment, because in school they're teaching you things that they want you to learn. Whereas outside of school, I'm learning things that I want to learn, right? I'm asking questions about things that I want to learn. So that's just the way I was wired as a kid, just constantly ask questions. And throughout my life, I've always been like that. I've always been very inquisitive, very intrepid. I always want to know more. Whenever I meet people, I always ask them about themselves, their profession, their culture, their family. And I try not to get too personal too quickly, but I'm just somebody that asks a lot of questions. And I question the answers that I get. So that's the best thing I can tell you about my personality type. I'm just somebody that is always questioning everything. And when you question everything, and when you're interested in as many things as I'm interested in, you accumulate knowledge and I guess you exercise your thinking skills and whatever. Amoros man says, I was obsessively inquisitive as well, even in school. Encircled says, I've lost a few jobs for questioning too many things. Yeah, I would drive people up the wall with all the questions. Even as an adult, there are some people who have just driven up the wall asking them constant questions because everybody knows stuff that you don't know, right? Even people who are younger than you or less intelligent than you or whatever the case may be, everybody knows stuff that you don't know. So I want to find out I want to find out the stuff that you know that I don't know. Do you know what I mean? You could learn something from anyone. Samil says the most dangerous word is why. Yeah, there was somebody, some notable public figure who once said that, but yeah, there's a lot of truth to it. Ocean Blue says, I personally couldn't stand school. Conformity and pre-subscribed learning drove me crazy. The main thing I didn't like about school was how regimented it was. Because I'm like a free-spirited individual. I did not like the regiment and routine of school. There were things in school that I actually enjoyed learning, right? I enjoyed in particular history. I enjoyed geography. Definitely enjoyed sports. I enjoyed, like woodwork and tech and stuff like that in school. So there were things I enjoyed, but I just didn't like having to turn up every single day at the same time. I mean, it felt like prison to me. It felt like prison. I didn't like how regimented it all was. I wanted to learn about the things that I wanted to learn about. Do you know what I mean? At my pace and at certain periods of my life, I was more interested in certain things. And in other periods of my life, I was more interested in other things, But yeah, I've always liked history. Always was interested in history because in history lesson, the teacher would basically, and she was a good history teacher. She was somebody who clearly loved the subject because she would, give us these accounts from history with a lot of passion, and I had a great imagination, so I could always visualize the stuff she was describing in history lesson, and I really enjoyed it. You know what I mean? So I always enjoyed that stuff. I liked biology as well. I always liked the natural world and learning about natural systems and all that kind of thing. So I liked biology. I found physics when I was in school, the way they taught it, very boring. They didn't make physics engaging for me to really want to make me pay attention to physics. It was, obviously, inescapably a lot of mathematics, but it wasn't taught in such a way that engaged me in particular. I'm sure it engaged a lot of other kids, but me, I was bored by the way they taught physics. I'm far more interested in physics now, right, than I was then in school. Because now I hear like quantum physicists talk about all these different concepts and what have you, and that is far more interesting to me. But the way it was taught when I was at school, it didn't engage me. Biology I was far more interested in. Chemistry to some extent as well. If I were to put the sciences in terms of how interested I was, right, in order, and in terms of how interested I was in school, I was most interested in biology, then chemistry, then physics at the bottom. I was good at English. Yeah, I was good at English. That's one of the subjects I was best at, actually, was English. Because I've always liked language and the use of language. Yeah, same as me, Ocean Blue. I was very good at creative writing as well. I was very good at that stuff. Kyle says religious studies in English was my thing. And ironically enough, religious studies, or at least the history of religion and the mechanics of religion, are very interesting to me now. But when I was in school, I wasn't interested in religious studies at all. That was probably the subject I was least interested in school was religious studies. I had absolutely no interest in that stuff whatsoever when I was in school. None. For me, RE, religious education as it was called then, was just a class for me to doss around in or just skip altogether. I had no interest in religious studies when I was in school at all. That's a good point, Danny. English gave you freedom over your work, All other subjects you were forced into specifics. Well, English and also art, right? To some extent anyway, in art. Or many times you could just draw or paint whatever you want or sculpt whatever you want. But English, yeah, with creative writing, you could just do whatever. Jamstar says, happening in a Royal Rumble between you and all your brothers. Who's left standing? Definitely me. Definitely me. You know, I had some skirmishes with them growing up, but none of them could take me now. I've been like the daddy of my my brothers since I was probably, what, 17, 18? Once I got bigger than them, it was a wrap. They got real bad man. Real bad man. Kyle says, man, we had to paint that stupid Vincent van Gogh painting. Occasionally in art, we were given particular assignments, but most of the time in art class when I was in school, you just did whatever the hell you want. You were given some general guidance about what they wanted. My art teacher in school was like a hippie type woman who blatantly bunned herb. She's blatantly had green fingers. Can we call it that? She was blatantly bunning herb. A hippie type individual. And she was just as chill as a teacher could possibly be. She was so chill. At times I would sit in art class and think, how is she even getting paid? You know, them ones. Because she was so chill. Another subject I forgot about was drama. I was good at drama. I was actually good at drama. In fact, back then, is it in your third year of secondary school or second year? You know the one where you pick certain subjects and other subjects kind of get sidelined a little bit? Or was it when I was taking the GCSEs? I forget. It might have been when I was taking GCSEs, but I was told by a drama teacher, if you don't take drama, you've made a massive mistake. Yeah, that's what the drama teacher told me. Like, if you don't take drama at GCSE level or whatever, you've made a massive mistake. I don't think I made a massive mistake. I think I made a great choice, to be honest. Because acting is one of the most difficult professions to achieve success in, you know? The failure rate for actors, people that get whatever GCSEs or degrees in acting or drama, however you term it. I mean, come on now. I don't think it was a mistake at all, but obviously that teacher liked my skills, acting skills and all that, but nah. To me, it was just fun. You know, drama class and all that is like a good laugh. Stryker said, I had an English teacher like that. The guy was always stoned and on another wavelength. Shout out to Danny. He says, would you go to Mexico? Cartel scare most off. I might. You know, I'm not ruling it out. But I'm not in a rush to go there. Let's just put it that way. I'm not in a rush. Mora's man says he might have done well in acting, Hatman, natural charisma. If you didn't want your face out there, you could have done voice acting. Yeah, but the thing is, you need more than natural charisma to make it in acting. At least film acting and television acting, you know? Particularly like Hollywood. You know? If you're really going to make it in Hollywood, You got to go down roads that I'm not willing to go down. So I guess you could fly under the radar as a not so successful actor, but most actors struggle. You know, it's kind of like a cliche. The vast majority of actors are like broke most of the time. You know, constantly going to auditions and getting disappointment after disappointment after disappointment and all that type of business. So it's a big club, innit? Paul says Mexico is a prime holiday destination, places like Cancun. Yes, but the Yucatan Peninsula, there's heavy cartel activity. You know, what tends to happen in places like Mexico is whenever you get an area which becomes popular with Western tourists, the cartels move in. Because the cartels understand that Western tourists equals recreational drug use and other such things. And for some of them, lower ranking cartel people, opportunities to kidnap and extort, right? So whenever a place becomes like hot or popular with Western tourists, that's when the cartels are going to come in. Acapulco used to be very popular with Western tourists, but the cartels moved in, it started getting more violent, etc., etc. Same thing happened with Cancun and other places on the Yucatan Peninsula. So, yeah. All right, peeps, gonna shut this stream down. Want to big up everyone for joining the conversation. It's been a great discussion as always. Special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat, those being Mr. Luca, Danny D-Man, Ocean Blue, Murazman, Harold Protagonist, making sure I'm not missing anyone here, GMS Nightmare, Mr. Classic Metal, Striker, Costanza versus Kramer, Adam Fawkes, Cash, Danny, Lawrence King, and that's everybody, I think. So yeah, big up all you guys for locking in. Take care of yourselves, be good. Until next time, catch you on the other side. Peace.